Jung identified a profound paradox at the heart of human development. Every step toward greater consciousness simultaneously elevates you above the human level of your age and alienates you from humanity. This isn't a bug in the system, it's the fundamental cost of psychological evolution. For those aged 24 to 45 navigating personal transformation, feeling misunderstood, or struggling with the weight of awareness others don't share, Jung's work offers both validation and a roadmap through the isolation. The key insight: loneliness from differentiated perception is inevitable, painful, and necessary. But it doesn't have to destroy you. Instead, properly understood and integrated, it becomes the foundation for genuine wholeness and deeper connection than you ever knew possible. Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, or from holding certain views which others find inadmissible. This existential isolation, knowing things others don't want to know, perceiving realities they can't or won't acknowledge, creates what he termed Promethean Guilt. Like Prometheus chained to the Caucasus for stealing fire from the gods, the person who has usurped new knowledge has raised himself above the human level of his age, but in so doing has alienated himself from humanity. Never again can he return to mankind. Understanding this mythology transforms your experience from personal failure to archetypal journey. Jung observed throughout his life that consciousness itself creates problems. He wrote bluntly, "It is just man's turning away from instinct, his opposing himself to instinct, that creates consciousness." Where unconscious people live in the security of instinct, which knows no problems, conscious individuals face doubt, uncertainty, and divergent paths. The biblical fall from Eden, Jung noted, presents the dawn of consciousness as a curse, and in many ways it is. His most personal revelation came in his autobiography. "As a child, I felt myself to be alone, and I am still, because I know things and must hint at things which others apparently know nothing of, and for the most part do not want to know." This admission from one of the 20th century's greatest minds validates what you may feel daily. You're not imagining the gap between your perception and others. Jung experienced this acutely during his break from Freud in 1913, entering what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period many considered psychotic. He wrote of feeling the gulf between the external world and the interior world of images in its most painful form. The mechanisms of this isolation operate at multiple levels. Every advance in consciousness removes you further from purely animal participation mystique with the herd, from submersion in a common unconsciousness. At work, you spot market trends 6 months early, but leadership dismisses your data as premature worry. In family systems, you perceive the unspoken tensions, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, collective denial, and when you name these patterns, you're told you're too sensitive or creating drama. In relationships, you crave conversations about meaning and authenticity, while your partner wants to discuss logistics and plans. These aren't communication failures, they're consciousness differentials. Jung distinguished between two pathological responses to this tension: neurosis, denying the collective, becoming isolated and narcissistic, and psychosis, denying the personal, becoming overwhelmed by archetypal inflation. The healthy path requires holding both, remaining rooted in concrete reality and relationships while accessing deeper truths. This is extraordinarily difficult, which is why Jung called individuation an heroic and often tragic task, the most difficult of all. Contemporary Jungian analysts identify the core challenge: you must differentiate from collective consciousness to become whole, yet resistance to the organized mass can be effected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. This means developing sufficient internal structure and self-knowledge to withstand the gravitational pull of collective thinking without becoming grandiose or isolated. The weak ego collapses into conformity. The inflated ego identifies with archetypes and loses touch with humanity. The individuated person walks the razor's edge between these extremes. Jung termed shadow work the apprentice-piece of becoming whole, the first and most essential task before deeper integration becomes possible. The shadow encompasses the inferior part of the personality, some of all psychic elements which, because of their incompatibility with the chosen conscious attitude, are denied expression in life. For people who feel different or see what others don't, shadow work carries special importance, because your unique perception may be either genuine insight or projection of your own unintegrated material, and often both simultaneously. Jung warned, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. He called this confrontation the first test of courage on the inner way, a test sufficient to frighten off most people. For the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided, so long as we can project everything negative into the environment. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. If you consistently perceive dysfunction, blindness, or problems others miss, you must ask whether you're seeing reality clearly or projecting your own shadow onto others. The answer is usually both. You may accurately perceive organizational dysfunction at work and be projecting your own fear of chaos. You may correctly identify your family's denial patterns and be avoiding your own complicity in maintaining them. You may genuinely see deeper than your partner and be using depth to bypass vulnerable present-moment intimacy. Jung provided a diagnostic tool. If you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Such a man has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself, as he is now unable to say that they do this or that they are wrong, and they must be fought against. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself, and if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. This doesn't mean your perceptions are wrong. It means they're incomplete until you've examined your own shadow. A marketing analyst who spots trends others miss still needs to examine whether their pattern recognition serves as defense against present-moment connection with colleagues. An adult child who perceives family dysfunction must also face how they've contributed to or benefited from those patterns. Someone seeking depth in relationships must examine whether they've integrated their own capacity for lightness and play. The shadow contains not only moral weakness, but also normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses, Jung noted. Often what you've labeled bad and projected outward is actually vitality you need to reclaim. The person who rages at others' laziness may need to integrate their own suppressed need for rest. The one who judges other shallowness may need to reclaim their own capacity for joy and spontaneity. Shadow work reveals that what most irritates you in others is often what you've disowned in yourself. Perhaps Jung's most urgent warning concerns inflation, the ego's identification with archetypal contents, creating a sense of special chosenness or spiritual superiority. This danger intensifies for people who genuinely do perceive things others miss, because accurate perception can slide imperceptibly into grandiose identification with the role of the awakened one. Jung defined inflation as an overexpansion of the personality through identification with an archetype, which exceeds individual limitations. He described it devastatingly. An inflated consciousness is always egocentric and conscious of nothing but its own existence. It is incapable of learning from the past, incapable of understanding contemporary events, and incapable of drawing right conclusions about the future. It is hypnotized by itself and therefore cannot be argued with. It inevitably dooms itself to calamities that must strike it dead. The prophet complex exemplifies this danger. Jung wrote of people who become the fortunate possessor of the great truth that was only waiting to be discovered, of the eschatological knowledge that means the healing of the nations. This doesn't always manifest as overt megalomania. More commonly it appears in the milder and more familiar form it takes in the reformer, the prophet, and the martyr. Even the disciple role carries inflation. Mental laziness becomes a virtue. One can at least bask in the sun of a semi-divine being. For people aged 24 to 45 navigating personal transformation in the social media era, inflation presents unique traps. You may curate an online persona as the awakened truth teller, while your shadow, doubt, uncertainty, need for validation, grows in darkness. You may doom-scroll through spiritual content, consuming goddess archetypes and quantum concepts, believing you're woke while actually being possessed by these images. You may join echo chambers that confirm your perceptions, creating an air of collective agreement that feels like validation but is actually shared inflation. Contemplative writer Thomas Merton, whose work aligned with Jung's, warned, "The most dangerous man in the world is the contemplative who is guided by nobody. He trusts his own visions. He obeys the attractions of an interior voice but will not listen to other men. He identifies the will of God with anything that makes him feel within his own heart a big, warm, sweet interior glow." This describes precisely the danger facing anyone who perceives differently. The temptation to trust your unique perception absolutely, while dismissing feedback, criticism, or alternative perspectives. Jung offered diagnostic questions to distinguish genuine insight from inflation. Are you curious about others' perspectives or dismissive? Do you examine your own shadow as rigorously as you identify others' blindness? Can you hold your perceptions provisionally, allowing them to be refined by experience? Most critically, does your awakening lead to genuine humility and service, or to subtle or overt superiority and separation? The antidote to inflation requires understanding that the ego serves the self, not the other way around. Jung wrote, "It is of the greatest importance that the ego should be anchored in the world of consciousness, and that consciousness should be reinforced by a very precise adaptation. For this, certain virtues like attention, conscientiousness, patience, etc., are of the greatest value on the moral side, just as accurate observation of the symptomatology of the unconscious and objective self-criticism are valuable on the intellectual side." Jung's guidance for navigating differentiated consciousness without inflation or isolation centers on integration, bringing unconscious material into consciousness while maintaining strong ego boundaries, authentic relationships, and connection to concrete reality. This isn't abstract philosophy. It requires specific daily practices. The foundation is accepting that you do see things others miss, without making this mean you're special, chosen, or superior. Jung distinguished between individuation, becoming your unique self, and individualism, narcissistic ego-centeredness. He wrote, "Individuation does not shut one out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself. The goal is wholeness, not perfection, connection through authenticity, not separation through superiority. For workplace dynamics, where you consistently identify problems or patterns others dismiss, contemporary Jungian approaches suggest this framework. First, radically accept your cognitive style without needing others to validate it immediately. Document your observations in writing, creating an external record that allows time to prove your insights. Share strategically with the 10 to 15% of colleagues who think systemically rather than trying to convince everyone. Most importantly, examine your shadow. Are you avoiding practical present moment responsibilities by over-focusing on future possibilities? In family systems, where you perceive dysfunction others deny, the work involves differentiating without disconnecting. Jung advised that only a fool is interested in other people's guilt, since he cannot alter it. The wise man learns only from his own guilt. You cannot force your family to wake up, and attempting to do so creates exactly the drama they accuse you of causing. Instead, maintain boundaries while staying connected. Love them without absorbing their psychology. Grieve the loss of unconscious belonging, and build chosen family with people who match your level of awareness. For romantic relationships, where you crave depth while your partner lives more from their persona, Jung's wisdom suggests examining whether you're using depth to avoid vulnerable, present-moment intimacy. Practice the paradoxical technique. If you always push for meaningful conversation, try a week of only surface-level interaction. This reveals whether your partner can initiate depth and shows whether you're forcing it. Assess honestly whether the relationship supports growth for both people. Jung believed individuation requires relationships that facilitate development, not ones that demand you stay small. Jung emphasized that a human relationship is not based on differentiation and perfection, for these only emphasize the differences. It is based rather on imperfection, on what is weak, helpless, and in need of support. This means authentic connection emerges from acknowledged limitation, not from perfected personas. When you risk showing your uncertainty, confusion, and struggles, rather than only your insights and perceptions, you create possibility for genuine intimacy. Contemporary Jungian analysts recommend daily practices that prevent inflation while deepening consciousness. Keep a shadow journal where you write everything you can't say publicly: your judgments, resentments, secret superiorities, and fears. This makes the unconscious conscious without acting it out. Practice holding the tension of opposites. When facing dilemmas, journal both perspectives with equal validity rather than rushing to resolution, allowing a third option to emerge from the unconscious. Notice your projections by tracking strong emotional reactions. What you can't stand in others often reveals what you've disowned in yourself. Active imagination, consciously engaging with inner figures while awake, provides direct access to unconscious material. Set a timer for 15 minutes twice weekly, close your eyes, and invite an image of the part of you that feels most misunderstood. Ask it what it needs. Let responses arise without censoring. Journal what emerges. One analyst reports a client discovered through this practice that his isolated intellectual part just wanted permission to be playful, leading to breakthrough integration of previously split-off qualities. Jung wrote The Undiscovered Self in 1957 during the Cold War, anxiously concerned about humanity's future in an age of mass psychology and totalitarian thinking. His warnings have intensified relevance today. He observed that the bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes, and that the mass state has no intention of promoting mutual understanding and the relationship of man to man. It strives rather for atomization, for the psychic isolation of the individual. This creates a vicious cycle. The more disconnected individuals feel, the more they seek belonging in collective identities, political tribes, spiritual movements, social media echo chambers, which further erodes individual consciousness. Jung wrote, "Instead of moral and mental differentiation of the individual, you have public welfare and the raising of the living standard. The goal and meaning of individual life, which is the only real life, no longer lie in the individual development, but in the policy of the state." Jung's solution was radical. Only the individuated person can resist mass psychology, not through rebellion or isolation, but through developing consciousness as organized and coherent as the mass itself. He wrote, "Resistance to the organized mass can be effected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. Only the change in the attitude of the individual is the beginning of the change in the psychology of the nation." This reframes your experience of differentiated consciousness from personal burden to collective necessity. Your willingness to endure the loneliness of seeing what others don't, to face your shadow rather than project it, to individuate rather than conform. This isn't self-indulgence. It's how collective consciousness evolves. As Jung wrote, "Such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself, and if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world." The contemporary manifestations of mass psychology, algorithmic echo chambers, performative persona creation, collective rage cycles, spiritual materialism, the inflation of awakening culture, all intensify the need for genuinely individuated people. You can serve the collective most effectively, not by conforming to it or preaching to it, but by becoming deeply, authentically, courageously yourself. This requires facing your shadow, withdrawing projections, staying grounded in relationships and concrete reality, avoiding inflation, and using your differentiated perception for genuine service rather than ego gratification. What emerges from Jung's work is a map more sophisticated than simple binaries of awake versus asleep, or conscious versus unconscious. The danger is not consciousness itself, but identification with consciousness. making the ego's awareness into an identity that separates rather than connects. Jung distinguished sharply between the ego, center of consciousness, and the self, totality of personality, conscious and unconscious. He wrote, "The self only exists inasmuch as you appear, not that you are, but that you do the self." The self appears in your deeds, and deeds always mean relationship. This reveals the resolution of the paradox. You become most yourself, not through isolation, but through authentic relationship. You access the self not by inflating the ego, but by placing ego in service to something greater. You use differentiated perception most powerfully, not by proving you're right, but by integrating what you see into constructive action. The person who has done this work can hold both profound awareness and genuine humility, deep truth and playful lightness, solitary reflection, and intimate connection. Jung's most radical claim was that, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Your experience of seeing what others don't isn't evidence of superiority. It's evidence of this light beginning to kindle in you. The isolation you feel isn't punishment. It's the natural consequence of consciousness, differentiating from unconscious participation in the collective. The question is whether you will use this light to illuminate genuinely or to cast shadows that flatter your ego. The transformative move is accepting that the Promethean burden, consciousness that separates you from the herd, doesn't have to define your entire existence. Jung insisted, individuation does not isolate, it connects. As you integrate shadow material, withdraw projections, develop genuine humility, and place ego in service to self, you discover that you're never truly alone because you've accessed the collective unconscious that connects all humanity. The differentiation that initially isolated you becomes the foundation for deeper connection than unconscious identification ever provided. For those aged 24-45 navigating this territory, the practical wisdom is this: start today with one shadow work practice and commit for 30 days. Find support through Jungian therapists, depth psychology groups, or peer communities focused on authentic development rather than spiritual performance. Accept that individuation is lifelong. You're not trying to arrive at some perfected state, but to engage consciously with the daily process of becoming whole. Trust that as you do this work, you'll naturally find others on the same path, creating authentic community born from shared commitment to consciousness rather than shared unconsciousness. The privilege of your lifetime is discovering who you truly are beneath the personas, the projections, the inflation, and the collective conditioning, and then doing that self in relationship to the world. This is how the light you kindle illuminates not just your own darkness, but contributes to collective awakening, not by preaching or proving, but by being deeply, groundedly, authentically conscious, while remaining connected to the messy, imperfect, beautiful human reality we all share. That is Jung's deepest wisdom on the danger of seeing what others don't. The danger is real, the burden is heavy, and the transformation available through embracing it consciously is nothing less than becoming fully human.